Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name is Thomas, back on the channel today with another discussion with the Esk from Twitter. We're going to kind of talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about Benitez departing the club, the very strange circumstances in which, we've sold a fan favourite player, definitely probably for him. We've overhauled the medical staff. We've done all of this and we've then sacked a manager. We've kind of overhauled the club and now we're looking for a manager seemingly without any footballing brains kind of left at the club. Very interesting situation that we find ourselves in. And of course, Paul's joined us on a couple of videos so far. We've spoken about the state of the club, the general governance of the club at the moment. But Paul, thanks for coming on. How have you kind of reacted to the past few days on Everton Twitter?
Well, I suppose it's first of all, thanks for having me on, and it's good. It's good to speak to you again. It is just another example of how poorly the club is run, isn't it? It seems bizarre that on was it the Thursday before he got sacked, Farhad Moshiri went up and saw him in last Thursday, wasn't it? It was only last Thursday. Went up and saw him at Finch Farm. They had a lunch together. They talked about prospective players they were going to bring in, and Benitez told the media that it was a positive meeting. So you just got to wonder what goes on, and of course all the things that went on beforehand were sort of evidence that Benitez was going to be around for a period of time, firing some of the backroom staff, bringing his own people in. Obviously. Whatever happened with Luca Dean, getting rid of him, bringing in two players who may or may not have been his choice, but nevertheless they were brought in, and then it wasn't as if, how can I put it? It wasn't as if the Norwich game was a surprise in terms of the way that we played. Okay, I don't think anybody in their right mind would ever have predicted Rondon would have started in a number 10 position. But given that all had gone on beforehand with Benitez and all the concerns that we had with him and all the apparent sort of, the players weren't up for games, it was no great surprise in the end that we lost, was it? So what was the difference between last week, the previous week, the week before that, and then the decision to fire him? Was it the fact that Bill Kenwright, for example, was actually him and Graham Schaff, they were the only directors of the club at the game on Saturday. And I know that Bill Kenwright, immediately after the game, started to brief some of his media people about, this couldn't go on any further, that we had to get a new manager in. And I just wonder whether, as has happened previously, events have overtaken Farhad Moshiri. There's been a because he wasn't there. There's been a momentum that's built up. Shocking result, shocking performance. You can see people saying, "Well, obviously this now puts us in danger of relegation, etc., etc." And Bill, perhaps, I don't know. This is just conjecture on my part, has taken advantage of that because he never wanted Benitez there, and the ball's got rolling, and then Farhad finds himself in a position where he can't stop the ball from rolling any further. The result being that Benitez is gone. I have to say that Benitez looked like a dead man walking. He didn't look great before, for all what he said about having a positive meeting with Farhad Moshiri. He didn't look that great when he did his press conference, and he certainly didn't look that great afterwards in the post-match interviews that he's obliged to do with the Premier League after the Norwich game. So maybe the writing was on the wall, and his explanation of a positive meeting actually was a load of nonsense. Who knows?
Absolutely,
it puts us in a real mess. Yeah.
We knew a couple of weeks ago when it seemed that Benitez was being given kind of free reign over the club at that point. There was all these rumours about saying, look, he's going to be in charge of transfers. He's already overhauled kind of the medical staff. And we all knew that was a bad idea at that point because it was only going to take a couple of games until his position was untenable. And it's just kind of another example of just unbelievable mismanagement of the club by Farhad Moshiri. Because, look, if Moshiri was actually kind of going to back himself and he was going to keep Benitez in place for the rest of the season, which we all knew kind of inevitably wouldn't happen. But even still, given the manager complete free reign over the club, it's just such a strange decision, and especially the incident with Luca Dean. Look, we're never really going to know the inside and out of what happened there, but it does seem like there was a rift between himself and Benitez, and it's taken 3 days between Digne being sold and Benitez being sacked. It's a very strange position that we find ourselves in, and something I do want to note on as well is, as we did mention, Benitez was given kind of more right to overhaul the club, take it in his own direction, which led to, Marcel Brands being the main name that had left. A couple of the lads featured in recruitment as well, they had left as well. So at this point, the board consists of Fard Mashiri, Denise Barrett-Baxter-Dale, Bill Kenwright, and Graham Sharp. They're all basically
not Fard Mashiri.
Oh yeah, sorry, I mentioned that twice. Yeah, sorry. And it now kind of consists of this group of people who well, we're never going to know who is making the decision behind the managerial choices. It basically seems like that's always up in the air. But are you maybe concerned that, okay, maybe Marcel Brands didn't have the control that he seemed to have had in years gone previous, which kind of really came to fruition under the Benitez kind of saga that happened over the summer? But look, Brands didn't have a lot of say, but are you at all concerned that, I mean, there is literally now no one at the club other than the board and the owner who are making these decisions in what is going to be a very significant footballing decision for kind of our season to come?
Yeah, I to be honest, I think that they were making most the board were making most, or Farhad Mashiri even was making most of the decisions at the top end of the club anyway, in terms of the first team. So how much of the people that have left will affect the people who might come into the club? I doubt. I think we've also got to remember that having brought in now 3 players already this window, we were unlikely to have brought in many others anyway because of our financial situation. So in that sense, does it change whether we're going to bring anybody else into the club this window? Personally, I don't think it does. It might impact our ability to get some players out, just by virtue of the fact that now all of the attention obviously is focusing on, and we can talk about this in a minute, I suppose, focusing on bringing in a new manager. Does that leave enough time and effort and people available to get rid of some of the players? Like, I don't know, Tosin, for example. Could we get him out on a 6-month loan before his contract ends? Who knows? But yeah, it's just indicative of how poorly the club is run, and it is quite scary when you look at the individuals and you think they're the people that are now responsible for our footballing operations.
Yeah,
once more.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's been the problem with the club for years. As you mentioned at the start there, even though all these names have left, may one be a Marcel Brands, it's not like he was really having much of an impact on anything anyway. So in theory, nothing changes in terms of who was going to be recruiting the manager. But I mean, it is terrifying for surely, well, if anyone in the media pays attention, anyone looks from the outside in, the way that the football club is ran is just, we are at a terrifying point. And that is also kind of summed up in a lot of the names that are being linked in terms of the future manager. And look, neither of us can probably decide who we want as a manager because no one really knows what's going to be the perfect situation going forwards. But clearly the various names that are linked shows that there's no kind of coherent process going on at all. I mean, you look at Mourinho, was noted yesterday. That's almost definitely a Farhad Mashiri kind of Hollywood manager, big name manager. Then you look at, there's obviously all these calls for Duncan Ferguson to be given it. You'd imagine more of them come from Bill Kenwright. So it's hard to see who is actually making this decision. It's clear that in the summer, Mashiri did, but kind of it is a very peculiar situation. And the question I'll put to you now is kind of, I mean, we as I mentioned before, we can't say who necessarily we think is going to be the manager because I don't think we can say for any certainty if anyone is going to be able to come in and turn this around drastically. But what kind of a name do you think we should be looking for, and why do you definitely think that it should not be Roberto Martinez of all characters?
First of all, can I say I think we should be looking for a director of football before we're looking for a manager. So my preferred route in this would be to appoint an interim manager or caretaker, as they used to be called. I'm not the world's biggest Duncan Ferguson fan, but I think he can do a job in the very short term. If we sort of put aside all of our emotions as fans, what are we looking at here? We're looking at probably we need 5 or 6 wins in the remaining 19 games of the season. And if you look at our fixture list over the next sort of 10 games, there's 5 or 6 very winnable games in those, if somebody can sort of just pull the players together. Because we've got, especially now that most of them are fit, we've got a decent enough squad if they're playing together, if their tactics are right, if the formation is right, if the motivation is right, to get 5 or 6 wins in the next, as I say, 10 games. And that then solves the problem of, are we going to get relegated? Because if we win 5 or 6 games, quite clearly, we're going to be sort of mid-30s in terms of number of points. And that this season looks like it would be certainly enough to finish 16th or 17th. Now, obviously, that's not where we want to finish, but in terms of being just purely pragmatic, that's the minimum that we require. So the question must be, could, for example, Duncan Ferguson, aided by Bainesy and aided by anybody else that's there, John Ebble, for example, can they do enough with the squad that we've got to get 5 or 6 wins? My view is that they probably can, but you wouldn't want them to be I don't think you'd want them to be a long-term solution. I think, as many people say, Duncan Ferguson really needs to go away and earn his stripes at another club, develop as a manager, before he could even be considered to be the long-term solution for Everton. And that would give us the time. It would give the board, it would give Farhad Moshiri the time to then go out and really recruit a proper director of football. I actually think Brands was a proper director of football, but he wasn't used in the right way. He wasn't given the right authorities whilst he was here. But if we went out and recruited, why don't we go and ask Michael Edwards, would you like to work for us? Michael Edwards is leaving Liverpool at the end of the season. He's probably the best director of football in the business. Why don't we start there? And if he says no, then you work down the list in terms of who are the best directors of football in European football. Michael Zorc, for example, Borussia Dortmund. Could we get him? We'd pay him an awful lot more money than he's getting paid where he is currently. Monchi, we tried Monchi previously. Could we get him? This Rangnick, could we get him when he leaves United? I think that's what we need to be doing. I think that's so. We have a short-term appointment, as in Ferguson. Leave him to run the football team. We won't be doing much or any more transfer activity. So the board and Moshiri shouldn't need to necessarily get themselves involved in that. The focus should just be on, let's get a director of football who can start on the 1st of July. And the first job that the director of football has, and we can brief that person beforehand, is to bring in the appropriate manager to take us forward over the next sort of 2 or 3 years. And let's start now, as we should have started back in 2016, as we thought we would when we brought Koeman and Walsh in. It is almost, it's back to square one. It's sort of snakes and ladders. We're going down a really long snake at the moment, back to square one to start again. That's the sensible way of doing it. I suspect, though, that there's some sort of panicky reaction here in terms of we need to bring a permanent manager in. The director of football model didn't work. Bill's experienced at football. He knows a lot of the English agents, etc. Farhad Moshiri knows all the super agents. We'll get by. If we do that, then we've learned absolutely nothing over the last 6 years. And that will be, I think, very dangerous. And I think if we do that, we'll end up being in the same position in 9 or 12 months or 18 months' time. I don't think we can progress unless somebody says what we've done in the past, we can no longer do in the future, and we have to do things properly from this point.
Yeah, I appreciate the point you make about Doug Ferguson as well, because I've kind of had my apprehension about bringing him in purely because he hasn't managed before. I'm probably almost more in favour of Wayne Rooney at this point, even though he's only managed 30 games or so, something like that. He hasn't actually had a full season yet. But because my thinking before was with Doug Ferguson was if he had left, let's say a year ago, and he'd literally managed a season like Rooney has done at Derby County, then he would actually be the first name basically on everyone's lips. I think the only reason that there is that contrast between him and Wayne Rooney is that Rooney actually managed, as I mentioned, 29, 30 games. It's still a very small sample size, but I mean, we all know what a job he is doing at Derby County. Obviously, as I mentioned, the sample size is small and very random as well. He's not under kind of any kind of it's not the same situation at Derby as it would be at Everton. I think Rooney would probably be my preferred candidate. As you mentioned with Dunk, is that it's 5 or 6 wins in 19 games, and look, it doesn't even sound like a lot. Going off the performance of the past week, the past few weeks, losing to the likes of Norwich, I think it will be a slight uphill struggle. But I do see what you mean, that it doesn't really take anything for Ferguson to prove himself to show that he can get 5 or 6 more wins before the end of the season. So I think it's a terrifying situation we find ourselves in. And obviously, you mentioned the logical thing to do would now be going to get a director of football, as you mentioned, sticking someone like Duncan charge, getting towards the end of the season, and then starting again. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do you think it is that our owner will follow that process?
1 being less likely, 1.
Yeah.
1 or 2, to be honest, because he shows no sign of listening. He shows no sign of recognizing the difficulties that he's caused himself in recent years in terms of his behavior, and obviously the difficulties that he's caused the club. The one thing about Wayne Rooney, I think about in terms of what he's done at Derby County, which I think possibly needs to be taken into account, is actually, in a sense, there's no pressure on Wayne Rooney at Derby County because there's no expectation that they're actually going to save themselves from relegation. I suspect that the closer they get to perhaps just getting out of the relegation places, then the more the pressure will appear, and it might be more difficult for him and for the group of players that he's got on very low budgets to actually continue to outperform as they have done. And my concern would be that if Wayne came to Everton, the pressure would be on him immediately. First of all, the pressure to survive this season in the Premier League, no different from the pressure that Ferguson's going to have now as interim manager. Mm-hmm. But whether or not he could actually do the job with the greater expectations that would then be put upon him at Everton, if he's already said, hasn't he, that he would find it very difficult to turn Everton down. But if he's got any sense, he should probably say that let's talk at the end of the season. First of all, I suspect he wants to do the job at Derby County, and he would be in so much a better position if he manages to get Derby County out of the relegation places, regardless of the 21-point penalty that they've got. He would put himself in a much stronger position at that point if he achieves that, and he then might then be the person to come in again, depending upon whether we go down the director of football route or whether Fahad Mashiri does another one of his Hollywood appointments. That's the problem. Is the big unknown is what does Fahad Mashiri want to do, and as is typical, he's not communicating what he wants to do. So we're all left to guess and to second guess at best.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And in my head, personally, I'm pretty much just between Rooney and Big Doug, because if we went for a name like Lampard, I don't really see why that's any. It doesn't make any logical sense for me because he hasn't proven any more than Rooney has. Yeah, he had a decent spell with Chelsea when he was under the transfer embargo, but as soon as he brought through all of these players in terms of they spent a lot of money when Lampard left that season, and he didn't quite live up to those expectations. And as you mentioned there with Rooney, there is going to be a lot of expectation on whichever manager comes in. So in terms of the unproven group of managers, which I say would be Rooney, Lampard, Ferguson. Lampard is kind of just the most illogical for me because he doesn't have any connection with the club. And of course, we do want to kind of get away from having connection with the club, but we need a manager that's going to get all the fans back on side, basically. And there's no doubt in my mind that Ferguson will literally unite the entire fan base, and that seems like a fairly easy one for them to go for. The only risk there being, of course, the results. And one of my final questions is the man that has persisted relentlessly in terms of the rumours linking him to the club is Roberto Martinez, obviously the man that was sacked, the first, well, almost Mashiri's kind of first act as the new owner. It seems like there was a large persistence to try and get him as the manager. I wouldn't be surprised if we haven't heard the end of that situation. But say hypothetically, which is, it's frightening that this hypothetical could actually very much become a reality, is that Martinez, I don't know, resigns from Belgium and then he takes the job, because I think it would make a lot of sense if he wants the job again, because as everyone says in these rumours, he wants to prove himself, and clearly Ken Wright for some reason is still a fan. So my last question, really, hypothetically, we end up with Roberto Martinez. What does that say for the state of the club, and literally what do we do next?
Well, it's a bonkers thought in the first instance, even to be thinking about him. He's a man that's been out of club football for 6 years now. He's a man who left the club. The football that we played just before he finished. Okay, we got to two semi-finals, didn't we? The League Cup semi-final, which was in the January, and then obviously the FA Cup semi-final in the April. By the time the FA Cup semi-final came around, I mean, we were a busted flush, weren't we, as a team? Mm. And yet he had a really talented team. That team at the time, we had Lukaku, we had Barkley was probably playing his best football for Everton at the time. We still had John Stones in the side. We had Delafeu. So we had some really talented players. Yet he couldn't get them to perform. He certainly couldn't get them to perform defensively. He's just the wrong man. And the idea that he thinks he's got unfinished business at Everton. Well, perhaps he should have thought about that before he took us to court and walked away with £13.3 million in compensation for having lost his job. It would be an incredible decision. I can see Bill Kenwright sort of doing the charm and the sort of the romantic notion of a sort of, hesitate to say prodigal son, but it's almost like a prodigal son type story. He's been cast out and he's been brought back, and that would appeal to Bill, obviously. But assuming that Mashiri is a hard-headed businessman, would never ever make that decision. If it was me, I would tell him never to darken my door again. We let him go for good reason, because he wasn't good enough at the time, and we wanted to go in a different direction. That direction proved not to be good in the long term, but there was good reasons for letting him go in May 2016, and we compensated him completely for his loss of employment. That's it. End of story. Good luck to him as Belgian manager. But I guess the question you ask yourself is, if any of the clubs that are competing, any of the English clubs that are competing for European football this season at the top end, so let's say the top 8 clubs, if they had a management vacancy at this moment in time, would any of those clubs choose Roberto Martinez?
No.
I can see that you're not. You're shaking your head. You're not nodding. You're shaking your head. And I think that's the question that we have to ask ourselves, because if we actually want to compete at that end of the table, then we've got to make the types of decisions that those clubs make, not the type of decisions that a romantic would make.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the problem, as I mentioned before, with the names that are being linked. There doesn't seem to be kind of a shortlist that is coming from one person. It's just everyone kind of putting forward their 2 cents, and obviously Ken Wright wanted Martinez back for that romantic appeal, which only he can see clearly, and only Martinez can see. And there is no one person seemingly making the decision here, and it's just it's a terrifying kind of combination. And I think Newcastle looked at Martinez as well and decided to go with Eddie Howe, and look how that's going for them. So
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
reason why no one is hiring Roberto Martinez, and we have even more reasons not to than maybe any of the clubs that he has interviewed so far. And but the fact that they did pursue that early on, kind of this week, there was clearly those persistent rumours that they'd been in touch with the Belgian FA, even though it's such an obviously bad idea. It's just a terrifying concept. Even if he doesn't end up as the manager, and we end up with someone else, and maybe we end up with a better system in place, like the one with the director of football. They already made that decision, which shows there's just kind of no logic kind of going through any of their head. It always baffles me that Mashiri is such a rich man, considering the way that he runs the club, because there's no kind of business savviness about him in terms of his running of Everton. But that's basically all of my thoughts on the general matter. I'm not sure if you've got anything you'd like to add.
I just think your last point there about the very fact that we spoke to Martinez, or we spoke to the Belgian FA, and we let people know that we were speaking to them, tells you everything that you need to know about the sort of the thought process, or the lack of thought process that's going on, the lack of sort of strategic thinking that's going on within the club. That's a purely reactive, emotional decision based on whatever logic the chairman brings to the table. Let's phone Roberto because he loves Everton. And well, yeah, it just shows that when we're nowhere near being hard-headed, totally focused on what's good for the club long term, strategic thinking, all the boring stuff that I talk about and write about. We're nowhere near it.
Yeah, absolutely. But that does basically bring me to the end of my general complaints about the club. And we'll have to see how this develops really, because obviously the 27 years process that's been going on a lot, and obviously I know that you are partially behind that, and we've spoken about that on the channel before. It's still very pertinent. This is kind of just the ending thing. Obviously that was not just against Benitez leaving, and the board's already shown this week that all the complaints that are made with that protest, and all the kind of previous complaints before Benitez was sacked, are still very relevant, and that is the case, isn't it? That this isn't the protest is in no way kind of slowing down now Benitez has left. It's maybe more pertinent than ever.
Yeah, it was never about Benitez staying or leaving. It might have been about how Benitez got there and the decision-making process that went on to bring him. But no, it doesn't change anything. The fact that Benitez has gone, and what we're just talking about now, in terms of what's the process, what's the thought process behind appointing a new manager, that just strengthens the 27-year campaign, because there's two things. It's called 27 years because it's 27 years since we last won a trophy. What's going to change that's going to make us trophy winners in the future? And we're not seeing any evidence so far in terms of this new manager search that anything's changed yet. So the call to Mashiri to listen to the fans' concerns, to engage with us, to talk to us, and then actually do something different, which is ultimately what 27 years campaign is about, is even more relevant this week than it was last week, based on the nonsense that we've seen in the media this week. So, respectfully, I'm sure he listens to your podcast and he watches you on YouTube. If he's listening, then that we want to have that conversation, because we think there are things that need doing that aren't being done currently. Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all very much for watching. As always, Paul, absolute pleasure to have you on. So kind of, where can people find you if they want to find out more, and kind of what is next in the 27 years process, and what should people be looking out for?
Okay, so actually, I'm not sure when this is going to go out, but on Thursday, the 20th of January, we've got our first Twitter Spaces in the evening. So that might be before this goes out, probably will be. But yeah, the campaign continues. I think there's going to be banners at the game on Saturday. I know that some of the other groups, the originals, are planning a sit-in after the Aston Villa game. And yeah, we will be back next week as the 27 years campaign. Driving. The really interesting bit is that we're driving attention to our situation with the media. The media are far more aware now of the issues surrounding Everton than they were, say, for example, a month ago when we started. So the campaign will continue until Moshiri actually speaks to us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for watching. Be sure to check out everything that Paul's just mentioned, and obviously check out his Twitter as well. The debates that we have in these videos are only a snippet of what Paul does, and there's plenty more content. And I mean, definitely check out the Twitter space. I really hope that no one is under the illusion that this is going to slow down anytime soon. As Paul mentioned there, look, the media is now paying attention. This is the most important part. Let's hope there's a bit more succinct thinking than there has been so far this week in terms of a managerial appointment. Hopefully we end up in a good situation, and I hope by the next time we make another one of these videos, we're not in a relegation fight or potentially worse. So as I mentioned, thank you all very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.